Dimisa, and case 306 Alwin Talma.
Thank you. Can you please call the next witness?
Mr. Terry Bisconi.
Thank you, Mr. Bisconet, for appearing before the Commission today. We're grateful to have you here. We have called you in relation to case 306, Alwin Talma, and his evidence before the Commission that you came along to his property with Mr. Anesta and hired the services of private contractors to demolish a shed which he'd built on his property parcel PR290, and he was operating, I call it a restaurant, but I think it was a snack bar or something on there for the tourists. And he claimed before this commission that that demolition of his property was unlawful because he didn't need your approval from planning, and the project had been approved by tourism, environment, health, and the fire brigade authorities, and he had a license from the Seychelles Licensing Authority. So we would just like to hear from you, number one, whether that be true, and number two, why the property was demolished. Thank you.
Authority. The Planning Authority is mandated by the Town and Country Planning Act, CAP 237. Its purpose is to regulate all development and to ensure orderly and sustainable development of the country. And this is the case in all civilized countries. Under Section 7 of the Act, it stipulates as follows. 7.1 of the Act, subject to the provisions of this section and to the following provisions of this Act, permission shall be required under this part for any development of land that is carried out after the appointed day. And any person who carries out any such development without permission under this Act or without complying with any condition imposed by the Minister or the Planning Authority in granting any such permission shall be guilty of an offence. And conviction to penalties as prescribed in Section 15. In this Act, except where the context otherwise requires, the expression development means carrying out of building, engineering, mining, or other operations in, on, over, or under any land, and the making of any material change in the use of any buildings or other land, including any subdivision of land which is or is intended to be used for residential, commercial, or industrial purposes. I jump a bit and go to Section 14 of the Act, which states, Section 14, subsection 1, if it appears to the Planning Authority that any development of land has been carried out after the appointed day without the grant of permission required in that behalf under this part, or that any condition subject to which such permission was granted in respect of any development have not been complied with, then the authority may at any time, if they consider it expedient so to do, having regard to the provisions of development plan in force or to any other material considerations, serve on the owner and the occupier of the land a notice under this section. Any notice served under this section, hereinafter called an enforcement notice, shall specify the development that is alleged to have been carried out without the grant of such permission, as aforesaid, or as the case may be, the matters in respect of which it is alleged that any such conditions as aforesaid have not been complied with, and may require such steps as may be specified in the notice to be taken within such period as may be so specified for restoring the land to its conditions before the development took place, or to securing compliances with the conditions as the case may be. And in particular, any such notice may, for the purpose of aforesaid, require the demolition or alteration of any buildings or works, the discontinuance of any use of land, or the carrying out of any land and building or other operations. Under Section 14, subsection 4, 5, and 6, it reads as follows. Any person on whom an enforcement notice is served under this section may appeal to the planning authority against such notice within 30 days of its service, giving reasons why the notice should be withdrawn or amended, or why planning should be granted in respect of any matter prescribed or prohibited or complained of in the enforcement notice. Subsection 5, if on receipt of any appeal to the planning authority, it appears to the minister or the chairman of the authority that there is a prima facie case for the withdrawal or amendment of the enforcement notice or the grant of any planning permission applied for therein, then he may, without prejudice to the outcome of the appeal, suspend the operations of the enforcement notice temporarily, in whole or in part, pending the final decision of the appeal. Subsection 6. If any person on whom an enforcement notice is served under this section is aggrieved by the enforcement notice, he may at any time, within 30 days of the service of the notice or of the issue of the decision of the planning authority or any appeal under subsection 4, whichever is the latter, appeal against the enforcement notice to the Supreme Court on any such appeal, the court. Now, to put this in the context of Mr. Talma. Mr. Talma asserts, and I quote from your letter, and you just mentioned it, that he got permission from tourism, environment, health, and fire brigade. I mean, the only authority that gives permission is the planning authority, as per law.
Because I think this is not the only case where someone else has given the permission but not planning. So I just wonder, when I go and ask, can I have a license to operate my restaurant, they don't look at whether I actually have the right to be operating that restaurant.
I don't know how it was operating at that period of time, but now, now the Special Licensing Authority requires that you come with an occupancy certificate before they issue with a license. I don't know how it was operating at the time. How these other authorities I don't know whether there is something in writing that you have seen that they've given permission for this development.
Never asked for planning permission for this.
Mr. Talma continued with his works. I met with Mr. Talma, and in fact, I have which I will give to you, a memo that I wrote to my PS at the time, in giving him what we discussed and the attitude of Mr. Talma at the time. And he said he was not interested in planning, he would go ahead with his development. So he was served with an enforcement notice as per the Act. We waited for 30 days. He never appealed. He had the chance to appeal. In fact, we advised him on the enforcement notice that he has the option to appeal to the authority, to the minister, or to the Supreme Court, which he never did. He continued with his development. And the planning authority, therefore, executed the enforcement notice. And this is how I was involved in it. Not Mr. Dolor that went on site, it was myself and a colleague, a development control officer, together with the police and together with a contractor. And we executed the enforcement notice as per the law.
So that's just taking down the structure. Yes. Do you make him pay for that?
We did not. We could have taken him to court to make him to pay the contractor, but we did not. We did not do that. But according to the law, we should have done that.
So when you take it down, do you like take it to the?
No, we leave it there.
You leave it there. You just take it and leave it there.
In fact, on the day he was informed, I mean, prior to the day he was informed that we were coming, and he was requested to remove all his belongings from the structure. And in fact, when we got there, he was there on site with somebody else, and he witnessed the demolition of the structure.
What sort of a construction was it? I mean, Yeah, was it just like a langa or?
Yeah, it was something that you could you could dismantle and put down. You didn't need to bring hammers and things like that to demolish it.
Okay.
You could just dismantle it and bring it down.
And the roofing was what, thatch or?
No, the roofing was corrugated iron sheets.
You know, from your perspective, he actually didn't follow the correct procedure, and he wasn't going to follow the correct procedure. And that, I mean, when he appeared before us, he had a long saga of not being able to develop. So it might have come to a point in time where he thought he'd rely on the other authorities other than planning to give him the authority, which was against the law.
Yeah.
Isn't there something about a non-permanent structure being allowed?
Not if it is being used for commercial purposes. Because he's
Not
going to
if
use
it
that
is-
for commercial purposes.
Or not for commercial
For commercial.
purposes?
But all
Then-
development you require planning permission. It's there. All development you require planning permission.
Well, how would that apply then to a shed where people sell fish? That's
Yeah,
people
it's-
set up little langa to
Yeah.
sell their fish. That's a non-permanent
Yeah,
structure, and it is for commercial purposes.
Yeah, you'd require planning permission for
Does it?
that. Yeah, well,
Well, quite.
Do you need a license to sell those fish too, or no?
No, that's it. Non-permanent structures go up all over the place.
I guess from Mr. Talma's perspective, because he had such a long history of trying to develop and not getting the permission he wanted, you know, he felt that maybe he was treated unfairly by not being able to have his shed.
no, but if he went about doing things the proper way, I suppose he would. I mean, his neighbor got planning permission for a restaurant, so.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, but we have had other cases where someone hasn't done the right thing, or no, planning's denied them, and then they've gone to the minister and got the minister to intervene on their behalf. And
Yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah.
if somebody has submitted a planning application and it has been refused by the planning authority, they can appeal to the minister, and the minister can grant the approval.
minister can grant even though, say, the applicable law.
No, the minister
Yeah.
the minister has what we call an advisory committee, the appeals advisory committee, and that advisory committee would interview the applicant and go look into the case and probably suggest or give some recommendations to the minister that would alter the proposal or make some alterations to the proposal. Then the minister would approve.
So a shed, he calls it a shed. A shed does need planning authority.
If it's being used for, yeah, well,
The shed was not a building as it didn't have walls.
it had walls.
Does a building have to have walls to be a building?
Not necessarily.
No. From your perspective, you don't think he was treated unfairly?
I think if he had gone through the proper, because he was advised. He came to see me, and I advised him submit a planning application, and we would look at it. And it would go through the proper procedures of consultations and everything else.
How many enforcements do you carry out on average in a year or in a month?
I wouldn't know, but there are quite a number, yeah. But we don't, most of the people who carry out development without planning permission in the recent past, well, what they do is they submit what we call a retrospective application, and the planning authority then guides them through that.
You can get retrospective approval.
Yeah.
So if I had a nice piece of beach, which I don't have, but if I did and I built like a little bar on that beach, I could perhaps, if I wasn't destroying the environment, make a retrospective
Yes.
application. It would, and it could
And
be granted.
if it met all the requirements, yes.
And that is in the Act as
No,
well?
that is not in the Act. This is something that the planning authority has
Discretion on?
in this, yeah.
Do many people do that?
Yes.
They
quite
do?
quite
Oh.
a bit, yes.
That's why you need the discretion.
Otherwise,
Why is that part of the Act?
We'll be demolishing 20 things.
Well, that's not part of the Act. Maybe it'd be more interesting to have amendments.
Yeah, we have submitted an amended act to the National Assembly, but it was
Make
not
more-
it was
more-
not assented to.
If not discretion, is not really legal.
But we have put this provision in the revised version of the act.
Thank you.
But of course, with some penalties. It has to go with some penalties.
Was there any political interference by like somebody higher up ordering you to go and do this?
No. None at all.
I see in the letter you report that he said he does not intend to submit any more applications to the planning authority as he's fed up. In view, every proposal he submits is either refused or, if approved, is revoked. Therefore, he is going to continue building without planning permission and ignore all advice or notices served on him from the authority. So I think that was the sense we got when he came for us. He had many ideas and none of them could get through. And I think even today he's still not managed to develop his land in the way that he wanted to. So I have, sympathy for him and his frustration in that regard, but I also appreciate that there is the procedure, and provided there's no political interference in that procedure as to who gets planning permission and not, you have to follow it, right? That's the law.
That's the law.
Is the planning authority geared towards absolutely strict enforcement to the letter of the law? Or do you have a policy where you try to help the applicant get what is necessary to have approval?
We have a planning authority board that goes in that direction in trying to help facilitate development, and this is why this retrospective issue has come into play, to try and help without going and demolishing everything that we see.
And is that board made up just from planning people or from different entities?
There is the private sector and the civil servants.
Member of the National Monument Board, do you still have?
No, and we have somebody from culture.
Yeah.
Are you very much au courant with the case of Mr. Talma?
Which case exactly?
I mean, his history with planning. He says each time he's applied, it's been turned down. If he was given a permission, it was revoked.
No, I didn't come prepared for that, so
Well, in that he sort of, he felt targeted every time.
Would that be a common practice to just?
No, you see, if you go through the documents, you will see that Mr. Talma has never submitted planning application per se to the planning authority. He has submitted what we call applications to what we call SIB, Seychelles Investment Bureau. But a planning application to the planning authority, I think he submitted only one in the very long past, which was an outline application. But nothing, no planning application to say I want to build this was submitted to the planning authority. I don't know whether you have all the records, but if my memory serves me right, I can only remember one planning application, and that was an outline planning application a very long time ago.
So at Glassy, he said he requested to operate a small 2-bedroom guest house. And I think he was told it was residential. And then he had problems with parking at another place. I mean, he has a series of cases, but we didn't ask you to talk to them, so I don't think it's fair to ask you to talk to them now. So we have no further questions about the shed. We do feel sorry for Mr. Talma, I have to say, but thank you very much for coming and for setting out the law for us. We appreciate it, and for explaining what happened in that case. Thank you very much. We will adjourn, and we will return tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Thank you.
All right.